People ask me all the time, what do you think about AI? And I think about people that are excited about AI like I am. AI acceleration, AI optimist. And I look at the people that say, I don't get AI, and I say they're not like us. Because they don't think through an economic lens. And that's what I want to do over the next 45 minutes. I stand between you, food, and even more drinks. I'm glad they passed out some drinks. It always makes me sound smarter when you drink more. But I'm going to give you a collection of my AI thoughts as curated today, fall 2024, between this nexus I'm at, between G2 and their treasure trove of data, and the Digital Data Design Institute at Harvard, which is really deeply studying not only digital transformation, but our charter is to democratize artificial intelligence for business people of all types. So let's start with an economic point of view about AI. In his book, How We Got to Now, author and innovation expert Stephen Johnson suggested that of all the innovations in the 20th century, innovations around artificial light may have had the most economic impact of all of them. Now, we take light for granted. We take illumination for granted. When it's dark at night, we can read. When it's a cloudy day, when you got the curtains closed here and they cut the lights off, right, Jenny? It's a different world. So let's go back 100 years. Without getting out your phone, I want you to imagine how difficult it is, even with the glare of this fire, this red slide, how difficult it is to read a book in fine print and study at night. How difficult it would be to perform an operation, to be a miner. How difficult it would be to work in a factory assembling cars at 3 in the morning with no light. The answer is you couldn't do it. We can bring us back to the present moment. I want to talk about the idea that the falling cost of artificial light is maybe one of the best analogies to equate the value of artificial intelligence. Just consider the history of light, okay? Let's go back, way back. Light originally was what? Burning piles of wood. And then there was the torch. I like to call that mobile light 1.0. And then we graduated with candles. We graduated with kerosene. Now, you know, when you think about it, though, and you look about it as an economist, you would have had to chop wood for 60 hours to produce 1,000 lumens of quality reading light. And to give you an idea of how to frame that, a 100-watt incandescent light bulb burns 1,500 an hour. So that's a lot of chopping. But I mentioned before there was innovations. A big innovation was candles. Originally, there was 3 different ways you could have candles. If you were poor folk, you could buy tallow candles. They were smoky. They were nasty. They produced a black smoke. You couldn't really read by them. Or if you had a little bit more money, you could buy beeswax candles. But then the Maserati of candles was spermaceti candles. George Washington reported that he spent $15,000 in today's dollars on spermaceti candles in a single year. They're harvested from sperm whales from their jaws and burned almost bright enough to read in pitch black night. That was a big innovation. Kerosene was another innovation with lamps. But when Thomas Edison and his team solved the bamboo filament problem, which made commercialization of light bulbs possible, the cost of artificial light fell off a cliff. Now, historian William Nordhaus, they should call him William Nerdhaus, has been studying the falling cost of artificial light, and what he likes to do is use inflation as a way for us to think about it in today's terms. In 1800, if you worked an hour, you would be able to buy 10 minutes of quality reading light with that hour of work. By 1880, with the age of kerosene maturing as a technology, that same hour of work would have bought you 3 days of individual reading light. But by 1980, with the LED light bulb, that same hour of work would have bought you 300 days of reading light. And as you can see here by this chart, economists were attracted to this. I mean, any economist would tell you that when you have something that's a utility and the cost drops this sharply in such a short period of time, there's going to be some very smart companies and cities that leverage that to create economic gain. I study Henry Ford, interesting guy, going to refer to him a few times here. Henry Ford was one of the first customers of General Electric's light bulb mass sale program. Believe it or not, a couple of light bulb experiments where the light bulb blew up, that's why they had to have the bamboo filament, created this feeling like we are about Waymo self-driving cars, that light bulbs were going to kill you. So not everybody, believe it or not, actually adopted them. But Henry Ford did, because he had to innovate how he got his use of capital down to get the Model T to become affordable. He's the one that invented the 3-shift day. Before that, in manufacturing, you had a single 9-hour day. But by leveraging artificial light, the factories that made Ford were able to run 24 hours a day. In fact, when they released the car in 1908, he continued to pile on these innovations. That's why 10 years later, it was a car everybody could afford, and you may not know this. They had 50% market share of cars by 1918 because of this innovation. Doctors were able to conduct surgery with less errors. Coal miners operated safer. You could drive a car 24 hours a day, which had a profound impact on trucking and logistics. Cities lit up with an entertainment economy. It is believed that the organizations that leaped on the opportunity against artificial light had a competitive advantage that was the peak of the Industrial Revolution. Now, here's the point. If leveraging the falling cost of seeing what's in front of you in the present moment could be considered by many as a catalyst for the Industrial Revolution, then I ask you, what's the value of being able to see into the future, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 months? Now, prediction is a powerful thing from an economic standpoint. We're all in this business together of insights, because I believe insights can offer valuable predictions, or predictions can fuel game-changing insights. And I've been in the prediction business for a minute here. Cecil mentioned I work for Cuban. Cuban sells to Yahoo, buys the Mavericks, dispatches some of us fools out to the Silicon Valley to look after broadcast.com. And I ended up running the Value Lab, which was our research think tank. We initially studied return on digital advertising investment, because when I joined, it was commonly believed in the advertising industry that banner ads did not and would not ever work. But we also studied the correlation between search data and buyer intent and actual supply chain. We had some early wins. Until the SEC shut us down, we were able to predict the volume of a stock based on overnight island trading after the company makes a negative announcement. That was a hot 5 minutes. We were able to partner with Sony on distribution of one of the PlayStations to try to stay one step ahead. But the most profound use of prediction I found was our ability to take search data and integrate it with box office data, which was showbiz data, and make predictions a week out. This was a lovely little movie by Jennifer Lopez called The Cell, metaphorically speaking. And this was the first time one of my rocket scientists said, you know what, I think we can predict a box office open 7 days out. Do you think that Hollywood would care about that? Well, if you know movie executives, they waste a lot of money at the last minute, because if you don't open big, you go home in terms of distribution. So we did a little study for Disney Theatrical, and we figured out you can really make interesting predictions. Now, here's the problem. That group headcount had to grow and grow and grow, because we didn't have machine learning doing this. We had rocket scientists building bespoke algorithms, doing multiple data pulls, finding errors in it, and then finally optimizing and cherry picking, by the way, a certain number of movies to create a value proposition, and we lost money at it. Now, we did make $100 million by convincing Disney to take us serious as a media partner. So it ended up having some upside, but I always felt like, wow, prediction is a really expensive thing, because experts and data scientists and human beings are really expensive to scale. But it all changed with machine learning. By the way, as I'll mention a few times here, a lot's changed in the world of artificial intelligence. I don't know about you, but machine learning has become the Nickelback of AI in just the last few years. You damn well know it works better, but you'd never say it at a party, right? Because you don't want to sound stupid. But anyway, I spend a lot of time talking to business people, especially private equity people. And by the way, if you've talked to more than 15 private equity people this year, you may be entitled to compensation. I talk to people in investment circles around thinking differently around artificial intelligence. And you know what I find so difficult? And you may be experiencing this too. It's just too complex. It's just this mystery to them. They don't understand how it works, and it frightens them. I think a big reason people push back against new technology is they can't make it just dead simple. And this book changed the way I thought about it. Professor Ajay and I have spent a lot of time together. He's helping me become what he calls an explainer. He says organizations need an explainer if artificial intelligence is important to their business. Here's what he says. And he's out of the Rotman School. This is the Creative Destruction Labs. They are ground central, by the way, for Gen AI. And it's in Toronto. Now, I know I opened with Kendrick, but there are good things happening in Toronto, and Rotman School is one of them. He says artificial intelligence is just a prediction machine. It takes information that you have, creates information that you don't have. Machine learning made very basic predictions, zeros and ones. That spot is cancer, that credit card charge is fraudulent, that picture is a dog. Those 4 pictures on the Airbnb should be in this order to increase bookings. Those were all simple predictions. Now, we talk about generative AI as being something different. It's still prediction technology. It's just making a much, much longer prediction. In fact, the prediction is so long it creates an artifact, and that's where the amazement comes in on the part of the user, isn't it? It's predicting the picture that you had in your mind. It's predicting the essay, the email you thought you were going to write, the graph you thought you were going to make, and the code you were about to spend 16 hours building by yourself. But at the end of the day, all it is a prediction machine. And the cost of prediction, much like artificial light, has fallen off a cliff since 2017. By the way, does anybody want to guess why 2017 is an important time in the history of artificial intelligence? I'll be coming back to that in a minute. When you think about it, when you look at the cost of prediction, even if you're looking at it from a machine learning standpoint, in terms of the time it takes to throughput data into material predictions, that dropped tremendously. But when transformers fixed something that I've been enthusiastic about since the 1980s, NLP, no, not the weird Tony Robbins neuro-linguistic programming, natural language processing, which did not work. Good God, it did not work. It was based on the statistical model. The number of semantical interpretations of words made it almost impossible from a theory. But when transformer technology came along, the cost of these predictions, especially the artifact-based predictions, dropped dramatically, and that's what the opportunity is now for organizations. When people ask me, what do you think about AI? I think it is the most significant lever we can pull on in our lifetime to create economic value for our organization. The question is, when will that be realized? And exactly what disciplines will we recognize as the game changers for our own companies? Because as you're about to find out, it's different for every single company. One of my favorite books, and there's really only a few I love on artificial intelligence, this is one of them along with prediction machines, Competing in the Age of AI. And it's going to age very well over the course of the next 10 years. Dr. Lakhani and Dr. Lanciti, they talk about the idea that what AI does is it reshapes the very nature of a firm. And it takes all the constraints of a firm and using 3 elements, I want to scale, scope, and learning. It just takes the top off what a business can actually produce. One of my favorite case stories, and you should look them up, they were called Ant Financial before they were seized by the Chinese government. They're now part of the Chinese government, or they were the largest, fastest growing bank in history. They had the lowest employee count and the fastest growth in the history of the bank. They had 16 times more productivity than Bank of America, 20 times more productivity than Wells Fargo, because they reshaped the nature of the firm by embracing machine learning to deal with every business challenge. And it emanated not out of the technology group in Ant, but out of the business leadership group through a thorough understanding of this leverage point. Now, the other thing I love to talk about is what's so special about AI to me. And that is not just that it's leveraged the falling cost of prediction or enabled it. The most important thing about AI to me is that for the first time in history, we have decoupled prediction from judgment, which used to live in an expert who would say, based on my 40 years of being in business and my gray hair, I predict you should do this, and I pass judgment that you will do that. In other words, in a single moment, an expert prescribed. But the problem with experts is they're expensive and they're on, as we like to say in football terms, expiring contracts. And their expertise becomes obsolete long before everyone knows their expertise is obsolete. And so the beauty of artificial intelligence is that when you decouple prediction from judgment, the machine makes the prediction to scale and the human being passes judgment. Now, this is important because when you think about the talent of judgment, and I think in organizations, it's the most important thing we should be recruiting for. It's the most important thing we should be recruiting for. There's really just 3 things you ask yourself when you pass judgment over a machine-generated prediction. There could be more, but let's say there's 3. 1, accuracy of the assumption behind the prediction. Data. First question before I pass judgment. Show me the data, and in particular, as I'll talk about in a minute, show me the context in which that data was collected. Second question, fit. If you're in marketing, how does that prediction fit our brand? If you're in a business, how does that prediction fit our business concept, et cetera, et cetera? And the third one, the most important one, is what they call payoff engineering, meaning if I put this prediction into motion, what will the payoff or the negative externalities be? That's human judgment. And human judgment is something a lot of people possess, people that you may not have to hire because they have a data science background or 30 years of experience making images on different types of photographic software, but because they know what good looks like. MIT professor John Horton talked to me about this. He says, Tim, in 5 years, we will declare this the Rick Rubin economy. He's the guy on the left. Yoda's the guy, Mick Jagger's the guy on the right. If you notice, Rick doesn't even have his hands on the faders. Rick doesn't play an instrument, never went to engineering school, but what has Rick got? He's got judgment. First time he heard Beastie Boys as a frat band, he knew there was something there. Convinced them, even though they were great musicians, rap was going to be their thing. Championed Public Enemy, made the Red Hot Chili Peppers' best record, put Johnny Cash back in his seat before his passing with arguably his best record ever. Rick could listen to something and figure out what to subtract to help it reach the listener, and that's a judgment. And I want you to think about how you recruit people into your organization that have judgment, because here's the problem. In the last couple of layoff years we've experienced as we keep waiting for this recession that hadn't happened yet, we let go of a bunch of people that we ask, what did they do? And we kept a bunch of experts with technical skills, and we let a bunch of Rick Rubins go on the street. So I think we have to reorient ourselves to find people that have a sense of taste, have a sense of acumen, have a sense of decisiveness, and those are the most important people. Somebody tell me what this is. Does somebody know what this is? What is this man doing? What test is he studying for? Very good. He's studying the knowledge. How many years do you have to go to school to gather the knowledge on average? 3 to 4 years you got to go to school. Still to this day, in London, to be a driver for London Cab. Because they don't want you to ever pull over and have to consult the map in front of a customer. That would be tragic. You have to study for at least 3 years every potential route possibility during different times a day so that you have the knowledge to know how to get a person from A to B. But for those of you that went to England between 1995 and 2015, there was a rising mobility crisis of unbelievable queue lines for cabs because guess what? There was a shortage of drivers. Guess why there was a shortage of drivers? Because cab companies thought it was a logistics problem. Then all of a sudden, Uber comes along with Waze. Waze was what? A prediction machine. It reframed mobility as what? A prediction problem, not a logistics problem. And it took the number of drivers from 40,000 pre-Uber to today, almost 400,000. And mobility has become better for all of us as a result. Why? Because as business people, we were able to look at the central business challenge, step back, and see it from a system standpoint as a prediction problem, which I think is the secret to being strategic about it. There's this concept I'm gonna write a lot about over this year. I call it the Uber effect. And it's not the first time in history where technology came along and all the taxi cabs, they were like thought it was gonna put them out of business. If you have to walk a long ways in an airport, you can thank taxis for being active lobbyists for safety. to move that Uber pickup as far away from your gate as humanly possible. Now, unfortunately, the taxis got moved there as well in the majority of cities, so it didn't work out for them. But the point is, more people have jobs now because of technologies like Waze. Remember ATMs? It was going to put every bank teller out of business. There's more bank tellers than ever. They just have a better, higher thought level job. They just don't give you your $200 you walk in. They actually can talk to you about your products that you have with the bank. But the Uber effect goes all the way back to Henry Ford. You know, I mentioned him a while ago, Henry Ford. He did a lot of really cool things because he was trying to make cars affordable. And he would do anything, we talked about it earlier in panels, hacks, to get to that. One of the most important situations where I first saw the Uber effect is when Henry Ford took this concept that Mercedes started in 1896 called interchangeable parts. And all the artisans that built cars up until the Model T, they hated interchangeable parts. They said all the cars are going to be the same. Cars should be shaped. The parts should be refined. Every car was put together like it was a piece of art. And guess what? If you made cars, if you were one of those 150 car companies at that turn of the century, it was an artisan thing. And guess what you didn't have? You didn't have enough talent. There just weren't enough artisans. So what happened was Henry Ford decides to integrate interchangeable parts on the Model T, and anybody off the street could build a car with minimal training, and it created incredible employment opportunities. Expect to see this Uber effect in the future, where in the beginning we worry that the jobs will be lost. Yes, the jobs as is may be disrupted, but what we're not thinking about is the jobs that will be created. I was at Dreamforce a few weeks ago, and I don't know if you were at Dreamforce, but it's like, I love Dreamforce. It's a show, right? It's like something between like let's just say it's a show. And one of the things that came out in the presentation of Agentforce, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, was a case study they've already seen out of Gucci. So Gucci began to use agents, an agent solution by Salesforce, to do upselling and to work with existing customers on service issues. And a lot of people thought it would put them out of a job, but what happened was the existing people working in the call center were actually able to focus on selling better and higher ticket items, and they actually saw an increase of sales of 30% and forecast even more headcount, just not answering simple questions about sizing and fit. And that's an example we're going to see played out over and over again in the next few years. Now, I mentioned before ChatGPT, that's the Taylor Swift of artificial intelligence right now. I love this paper. I said 2017 was an important day. This is the paper that Attention is All You Need that introduced transformer technology, an elegant solution that was able to leverage tokenization, attention, and other innovations to make natural language processing work, and not just in Star Trek, in the real world, where you could talk to data and get results. And it was a breathtaking thing. You ask yourself, 2017, but ChatGPT, I didn't even hear about it till when? Late 2022. Well, that 5-year gap, I bet you wonder why it didn't happen right away. Well, guess what? No one figured out the Mark Andreessen approach to such an innovation for a few years. Even when OpenAI, the nonprofit company, was funded and doing a lot of research, they didn't immediately have the real magic sauce, and it was mentioned earlier today. The magic sauce for innovation adoption is and always will be interface. That's it. It's going to be the interface. Now, when I think about my early career, back in the days of WW1, Netscape, 1993, I used to use Archie. I used to use Gopher. How many of you had Pointcast running overnight so you could get the news the next day you went into work? Then there was Northern Lights. You haven't heard of any of those. At Yahoo, Jerry and David explained that they created Jerry and David's Guide to the World Wide Web because Jerry couldn't find great information on golf and David Philo couldn't find information on sumo wrestling, his passion. So they created this guide in the very first place to try to organize things. But of course, Netscape made it possible so any fool could go on Netscape and find something interesting on the web. Well, that's exactly what happened with ChatGPT. That's why you hear a lot of CEOs walking into a meeting and saying, well, I know how to use ChatGPT. Why don't you? Because the interface was dead simple. And I've learned that whenever you make technology easy to access, people are empowered by it. Especially people higher up in an organization who constantly feel the pressure to provide thought leadership. However, when you look at like the economic realities of ChatGPT, it's interesting to note the difference between revenue and cost takeout. So McKinsey at the end of last year did one of my favorite studies based on the methodology, and what they were looking at is different use cases for generative AI, and they looked at them through two lenses. Lens number one, how much increased revenue can generative AI create for an organization? Lens number two, that's the bottom axis, how much can I reduce the cost, or they call it like reducing functional spend of an organization. At a glance, it's pretty interesting, don't you think? Sales and marketing and software engineering are all at the top of revenue creation. At the bottom of revenue creation is things like pricing, strategy, corporate IT, legal, and procurement management. I'll talk about why that's the case in just a minute. But other thing that's really interesting to notice is that when you see the sales and marketing use cases, you see the revenue, but you don't see the cost takeout, do you? Now, McKinsey explains the reason why. Unlike customer operations, where there seems to become a satisfactory one-to-one replacement, the proper lens to look at generative AI through is actually the lens of augmentation. And the reason why is because if you narrowly look at generative AI, like we've looked at, automation for the last 30 years, as something that just eliminates a human being, you'll never be satisfied enough with the substitute to keep it over the long term. So it's going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But augmentation is measured by an increased capacity with the same headcount is the magic of adoption from the finance side of the organization, something I study a lot. And I know there's people here from a variety of different disciplines, or some of you here from human resources. Besides using it in your own work around cultural health, for example, and engagement across human resources, AI is starting to become very interesting, mostly machine learning, a little bit of generative AI. There is a huge question these days about bias, of course. Even in my own business of insights, I think a lot about AI, so I have radar. I was talking to a few of you earlier. I built a custom GPT. You got to do this. If you have OpenAI, and think about this. This illustrates the cost of following prediction. $20 a month, OpenAI. AOL was more than that. And 25% of your time on AOL was logging in, okay? Right? I have a custom GPT, because you can build your own GPTs if you have the $20 license. So I have a little GPT called TLDR. Okay, TLDR helps me read this tsunami of studies and information that keep getting forwarded to me by various people, whether it's somebody at G2, whether it's one of my research partners out in the world, or whether it's the folks at Harvard. I can't keep up with it, so what I figured out is I would create this large PDF and shove it into the context window, click upload. And I would train it, and I would say, listen, these are the 5 things I'm currently covering. These are the 6 best studies I've read in the last year against these things. And then here's 80 different studies that I've already highlighted and annotated. I want you to read all of them and become me. Now I'm going to give you a study. I want you to highlight it, annotate it, and give me a call out. I trained it, and now it's an early warning system. This weekend, it went off and said, hey, if you don't know what liquid foundation models are, don't watch football today, because it's going to blow up next week and you're going to be late. So you can use generative AI with training and with customization to be incredible radar for insights to allow you to be, kind of informative in the minute. I also like to use it to set strategy. What I like to think about is, what are the different revenue organization motions going on that insights can align to based on looking at data from the revenue organization? What are different marketing motions going on that we can point this at, et cetera, and using generative AI to help me as an insight leader be more strategic about where we put our precious resources versus just getting traffic to the site or attention and media mentions. I use it to criticize data or criticize the origin of data, or in some cases to analyze raw unstructured data. If you've never uploaded a massive spreadsheet into an enterprise instance of generative AI and asked it for insights, it'll shock you that it may come up with 3 stupid things, but it's going to come up with something that maybe you haven't thought of before. And then finally, I use it a lot for analyzing back of the envelope surveys. I find it to be a great thought partner with the professionals that I've relied on for years and years to do that. Now, of course, generative AI isn't perfect. Hallucinations are abound. I think of Gen AI, I think of it like an intern that went to San Jacinto State College. There's nothing against the college. There's nothing against interns. But dadgummit, you know you have to sit on all of their work, and you're not going to put them in front of the customer unfiltered. Now, some of my less optimistic friends would say, oh, ChatGPT is like a chaotic Labrador. The point is, it's very supervised learning, and the world's getting ready to move from supervised learning to semi-supervised learning to unsupervised learning, and then the lid is going to come off the opportunity to create economic value. People ask me all the time, what do you cover these days? Because obviously we all have things we cover. So in artificial intelligence, there's really 4 things I cover. I'm going to talk about those for just a few minutes. I'm super passionate about agentic AI. I have been since 2022. I'm just so excited about that great leap from supervised to unsupervised and everything in between. I've been completely, Dr. Sheldon Cooper, obsessed for the last year and a half around model innovation, which I'll explain. The rise of context, which I think will be one of the buzzwords for next year. You heard it here first. Remember, content is king? Well, when it comes to research, context is king. And then finally, the most of my work is around return on AI and really rethinking AI from how we talk to finance leaders about it. Okay, agentic. I don't know if you bought one of these. I know I did. My favorite review of the rabbit was, it was undercooked. This came out in January of this year. It was built on something called a large action model. Does anybody seen a rabbit in real life? Should have brought one on the trip. They're kind of cool. Push to talk. Tell it to go book you an Uber to pick you up at your house and take you to Terminal A at DFW in 15 minutes and go ahead and choose XL if available and Comfort if not. And it says, okay, and the Uber shows up. Kind of cool, right? Push the camera, take a picture of an article, say, summarize the article, tell me where I can buy the product. Take a picture of something, say, what is that? Oh, it's a bonsai tree. The problem is they didn't build up a very rich ecosystem. The problem is when it was launched, it was a little bit buggy, but it was a signal of something. And researchers were just saying, hey, agentic is the future, because when you think about it, we've moved from prediction to suggestion, but with agentic, we now have execution, and that is seismically more impactful on the velocity of a business. But honestly, most of us in the research community felt like that's a 2026 thing. Start hearing about it in 2025 with some proof of concepts, like how Lindsay, remember Lindsay over Christmas 2022, when all your friends had terrible profile pictures because they took it at their 30th high school reunion, and they put it in Lindsay, and they looked gorgeous, and it got all excited. OpenAI was behind that. It was a wonderful proof of concept for ChatGPT scale. Well, I believe this was one of those things where it kind of teased people with what was possible, but we all thought not until at least 2026, probably even 2027, when the hyperscalers will actually trust it. Well, guess what? We were dead wrong. Everybody keeps moving up the schedule. And then, like I said, I was at Dreamforce, and oh my gosh, have you seen somebody go all in on something like Mark Benioff and the team did on Agentforce? And I've got to say, even though I and many people in the data science community felt like this is early, they've done some amazing stuff, which just proves what happens when you can point thousands of engineers at a problem with a sense of purpose. And they did a lot of things I liked. They wrote a lot of data to the core from their clouds, which made it almost instantly accessible. They really leveraged Atlas as a reasoning engine to take this thing called vector-based RAG implementation, which is this context thing, being able to absolutely use context as a way to reduce hallucinations, and then just created a strong set of use cases, mostly around customer experience and customer service. And most importantly, they built a massive network of partners to bring this to market. I'm telling you, I think agentic is going to be a very big deal by next year for a lot of businesses, whether you attach to a platform like a Salesforce or like a Microsoft or like an Oracle, many players are there, HubSpot's there, or whether you decide to build your own agentic solution. I believe we'll look back at ChatGPT as the picks and shovels of the AI revolution, where it created more work for you than it did solve things for you. Because the idea of that is exciting. The second thing I love to think about is model innovation. I mentioned I'm like so obsessed with this idea. Clayton Christensen, Innovator's Dilemma. I've always loved that book. He wrote a book after that called Seeing What's Next. I love that book too. In Seeing What's Next, and this is way before many of these disruptions happened, Christensen talks about this concept of disruption being caused by one of two things: overshoot or undershoot. So sometimes you undershoot a market and that creates an opportunity for somebody to come along with something that actually works. But what I really want to focus here is on the concept of overshoot. For example, when you take a look at cable television and television networks, for years and years and years, Clayton Christensen would have said through sustaining innovations, they kept making it better and better and more expensive till at one point you looked up and cable was like a car payment, wasn't it? And there was nothing on. 500 channels, $300, nothing on at night. They had overshot the market. So here comes YouTube. And YouTube was terrible. That's how it always works with disruptive innovations. The incumbents looked at it and said, unprofessional, terrible grainy video, terrible equipment, and they didn't respond to it. And as a result, there was a tremendous disruption that occurred with streaming as we see it today and over-the-top video consumption. I say all this to say large language models may end up being an overshoot. We're now getting into this bragging zone of trillions and quadrillions of parameters. And I do understand that these frontier models with their general reasoning capability or general inference capability can be incredibly creative, but there's a body of research building up that small language models that are a fraction of the size for use cases where there's a small body of precise language. Think about flight navigation. You don't need 5 trillion parameters for the language of flight navigation. So what I've been watching now for a year and a half now are just innovation after innovation with smaller and smaller and smaller language models to the point that we'll have effective models for many of your use cases that can run on only 1 billion, not trillions of parameters. They'll fit on a laptop. They'll run on a phone without access to wireless. They may not have creativity because you may have a parallel swim lane for that you just buy seats for, but they'll actually be an asset you owned. And if you've ever hitched your marketing wagon to a platform like Facebook or Google and watched the rules change right before you, and you understand the value of owned audience, I warn people about the importance of owned models. I'm lecturing at a private equity conference. I mentioned there's medication and compensation for that in a few weeks. And I'm talking about the idea that, and it'll lead to my next point, a lot of times when private equity invests in a company's like, our data is so valuable. Our voice of the customer, we talk to the customers, we have all this customer data, And in a minute, you'll see I have a thesis that a lot of it's just collected in the wrong context, and in a world of AI could actually be counterproductive. But the real asset a company can build is owning its own proprietary model that's good enough for alignment and actually creates dramatic increased capacity with the same headcount as their nearest competitor. At that point, the AI investment moves from the profit and loss statement to the balance sheet and makes a profound difference. So, it's always something with model innovation. Like I mentioned before, TLDR was like, have you heard of liquid foundation models? MIT has a startup. Have you heard of this one? Oh, this is exciting. LMFs, liquid foundation models, they're based on liquid neural networks. They don't use transformers. And they operate and they win the massive multitask language understanding shootout. And that's a way that you determine the performance of a large language model to solve problems. As you can see, the LFMs are outperforming best of breed small language models, and not by a small amount. But what's so remarkable about the LMFs, because they're smaller, right? But more importantly, they don't require more memory footprint as you put data into them, which means they don't require more compute when you scale. This is like cloud computing all over again. When you think about the hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on CapEx for large language models, the assumption behind NVIDIA's valuation is that it will always scale the memory usage as you find more use cases. But what if it doesn't? I'm keeping my eye on that. Well, context. Context is everything. There's 3 things I think about with context. The first thing I think about with context is the concept of how we make a language model have less hallucinations, okay? In the beginning, when I say in the beginning, back in like 2019 when they were first trying to look at language models in a data scientist laboratory, they always talked about fine tuning. As one researcher at MIT called it good parenting. And so what's occurred in the last year and a half, I would say, and many of you are familiar with retrieval augmented generation, it's called RAG. And basically it's what I do with my TLDR. I don't fine tune a GPT. I just give it a bunch of context. And I say, instead of looking at the general internet to do this thing for me, I want you to serve a specific role and just look at this and this alone. And I'm going to give you context. If you follow anybody on Twitter to really stay up on AI, it's not me. It's Ethan Mollick, that guy. Professor at Wharton, wrote a great book called Co-Intelligence. He's got a great Substack. He suggested, and I believe this, that context is actually going to be better than fine-tuning for creating a large language model that is not only accurate, but still somewhat creative. Think about parenting. If you get over fine-tune, you lose a lot of your creativity. But if your parents give you more context as to why you should do a certain thing, you have more agency. I think we're going to see more context driving innovation in artificial intelligence. But the other piece of context that I'm super interested in is context around data collection. I mentioned before, as a researcher, I've always wondered about the value of first-party voice of the customer data. I have to be transparent. It's one of the reasons I joined G2 is that I keep thinking about it as a researcher in terms of the work of Daniel Kellman. You think about, he studies bias and noise. And he used to talk about this a lot in his lectures, the context by which you gather data, the theater of discussion, can introduce a lot of bias and noise. Let me give you an example of why context is important. So dad gets his son, Donnie, who's 13, an iPhone 16. I didn't get a wheelbarrow when I was 13 years old, let alone an iPhone 16. Are you kidding me? But Donnie's been asking him for it and asking him for it. And by the way, dad's feeling kind of bad because he misses every game, never home for dinner, taking business trips when he should go to events at the school. And so he feels like, I'm going to make it all up to Donnie. I'm going to give him the iPhone. And then about a week later over dinner, dad's looking at Donnie. Donnie's looking at his phone. Dad says, "You having a pretty good life? Am I okay, Dad?" Donnie's like, "Absolutely, Dad." Then, that same week, his best friend at school says, "So, how's it going at home? How's your relationship with your dad?" What does Donnie say? Donnie says, "My dad buys my love about once every year. He love bombs me with something. The latest one was the phone. He doesn't come to anything, doesn't care about anything. Even when he's at the dinner table, he's not at the dinner table." If you trained AI on the first party answer that dad got, imagine what dad would be prescribing to do. An iPhone every 3 to 6 months, keep missing things at home, right? So I think a lot about how can we get context from data that separated, say, voice of the customer from the renewal, from someone who's got an active service ticket in progress, from someone who's had an amazing on-site experience with the brand, because every single one of those plus or negative distorts the data. And so context, I believe, is going to be very important as we begin to not just use data for insights, but we train it with an exponential tool like AI to trigger activities to scale. And then if I haven't geeked out enough about context, one last thing if I could, one last thing. How many of you work at or cover a company or work at a company that would like to fight churn? Okay, churn's an interesting thing, and a lot of times people think, well, the secret to churn is, good service. Nope, that's not it. Okay, I got it. The secret to churn is integrations, and you work really hard on integrations. You have entire business development functions and integrations. I was looking at this data from G2 about AI writing assistants. What an explosive category, right? They also have the lowest churn. And what's really interesting, when I interviewed Grammarly about this, and I asked him, I said, it's amazing what stick rate you're having as an AI tool, because the churn just is incredible. Even of the majors like OpenAI, what's the secret? I said, what kind of integrations are you doing? And they said, integrations? You don't need integrations. You need to operate in context with screen vision. We just see the context of the user experience and show up when we think they need us. And so we're going to see a lot more context placement of products in the future to assure utilization without the incredible high cost of integration. So that's the other thing I'm excited about. Finally, return on AI. Show me the money. Now this is one I've had to spend a lot of time interviewing chief financial officers, especially ones that are owned by private equity. And it's really interesting. They have attitudes and opinions about artificial intelligence. And by the way, they're not right, they're not wrong. They are the culture of the buying organization, so you need to align to them, right? Jeremy, where's Dr. W? So one of the most insightful things I heard earlier today was talking about the idea of connecting to a CFO line item they're already familiar with. So after doing About 40 interviews this year with CFOs. Let me reveal to you what I think the secret is. If you either are trying to convince your organization to invest in artificial intelligence or you sell artificial intelligence and you're trying to help the customer see the value, there's really 4 things you have to think about. If you want AI to pay you back, the first thing you have to do is start with the problem and not the technology. Number 1. When I go do on-site strategy days with companies about AI, it's always the business team, never the tech team. We start with the business team. We identify business challenges that have a material impact on either the valuation, the P&L, or the value creation plan. And then we do what's called a work back to identify, is it a culture problem, a production problem, a market problem, or a prediction problem? If it's a prediction problem, then it's AI addressable. If it's AI addressable, at that point you begin ecosystem research, but not before that. See, the problem is sometimes what happens in an organization is they get excited about a type of technology, and it has to go finding a job once you buy it in your organization. Or worse, you go to technology and say, what should we do about AI? And they start where their data is the best or their partners are the most ingrained and installed. So if you start with the business problem and work backwards, you'll have a natural connection to real business metrics they care about. So for example, if any of you have worked with a chief financial officer on go-to-market investment, like investing in sales or marketing, there's a metric they always use, and it's a challenge. It's called lifetime value customer acquisition cost, or better known as LTV CAC. And there's a ratio for it. And when LTV CAC's around 2 to 1, they're breaking even. 2.5 to 1, pretty good business partner. If the LTV CAC gets above 3 to 1, I'll buy all they've got. So I believe that if you start with the problem and work backward as an AI provider or as an investor in AI, you peer to a real metric they care about like that. The other thing I would say too is that productivity is a dangerous metric to sell on for a lot of reasons. Productivity doesn't really align with how a public company reports their earnings. Productivity is a very fuzzy metric that is not really realized, because here's the problem. You can say, my people are saving 40% of their time using this generative AI. Well, what did they do with that 40% of the time? Because redeployment hasn't been studied on the back end. What, are they watching TikTok videos now that they've got an extra 2 hours? So the problem with productivity is it's hard to measure. The bigger issue is it leads to a narrow view around headcount. Like, you tell a CFO, I can get 30% more productivity with the coding assistant, and they say, great, cut 2 heads next quarter. And the manager will never ask for it again. The better way to think about it is to start with the problem and work forward with what would it be if we could get 30% more out of the same existing headcount. Number 2, become dangerous. What I mean by this is there's this thing Dr. Sadal Neely writes about called the 30% rule. And that is, you only need to know 30% of a technology to be able to leverage 100% of its business value. I tell business people, you don't need to know everything about AI, but you do need to know enough to become dangerous. And the most important thing you need to learn is how to spot a prediction problem and how to take your business challenges and classify them so you can reframe problems as prediction problems. Once you do that, you can become highly effective here. You have to define your tolerances, meaning you have to decide as an organization, what's your tolerance for error? I mean, the reason that sales and marketing are such strong use cases for Gen AI is we have a high tolerance for error. The reason that pricing, R&D, corporate strategy, and legal are so low is we have no tolerance. It's like self-driving cars, right? Kill one person, it's never going to be something we let everybody have on the streets. So tolerance, having that awareness as an organization is really the key to pushing the envelope as far as you can possibly push it. And the last thing is to focus on utilization. Don't ask people, is there return on investment? Measure how often they use the tool in consideration of the task on hand. I don't know if you've ever seen this image, but even after they gave the Model T to postal delivery professionals, they didn't always use it right away. As a matter of fact, for a long time, many of them, they just like to let it be a better seat for the horse to pull them by. Why? Well, there was 2 bigger reasons. Horses were quieter and religious objections. So we have to understand that utilization doesn't just happen. We have to measure it actively. And I think that's where the real insights come from in terms of understanding its return on investment. I want to talk just a little bit now, just to finish the talk on this idea of why I think AI is my best friend. I mentioned Ethan Mollick. Follow this guy on Twitter. He's amazing. He says, I get comments, I post too much positive. Well, guess what? He's right. As a matter of fact, I kind of think of AI like this German Shepherd. Now, just follow me for a hot minute here. Arguably, a dog is our best friend. We share a cat we share an apartment with a cat, right? But the dog is man's best friend. It's a concept that's not always been true. For centuries, in different countries, dogs were banned for a variety of reasons. Some were considered thieves. Some were considered disease. In Reykjavik, Iceland, they were not allowed in the city for 60 years between 1924 and 1984, mostly because of hygiene and not fit for city living based on not being trained and feral. So dogs weren't always allowed. As a matter of fact, a lot of breeds to this day across countries, from pit bulls to terriers to a variety of other breeds, are specifically banned. So dogs aren't always our best friend. And as we know, the German Shepherd may be cute and lovely, but in the wrong hands, it might bite somebody. And when we ask ourselves, what's the difference in the last 1,000 years of dog ownership? It's real simple. Humans in the loop. Better breeders, better trainers, more responsible owners. And I think when we look at artificial intelligence economically or through utility, if we think about this presence of humans in the loop, then we can maintain a precious balance between solving our toughest challenges in the world and avoiding these calamities that many people who have a vested interest in scaring us talk about every single day. I just want to close with one thing here, and I appreciate you sticking around for this. It was March 2016, right before March Madness, but it wasn't March Madness. It was at the Four Seasons in Seoul, Korea. It was Go Madness. This is the DeepMind Match Challenge. This is Google DeepMind. And they had developed a machine learning program to compete against the 9-dan champion of Go. Now, for those of you that don't know, Go is an incredibly complicated game. Go does to chess what chess does to checkers. With chess, the first move, you got 20 possibilities. With Go, you've got 300. When you do the back of the envelope, it was one of the harder challenges in artificial intelligence. They had beaten a European champion, but he was kind of a hack. So they said, let's take on the Tiger Woods of Go. Let's take on Lee. And he predicted famously, yeah, I'll take your 150 grand for the challenge. I'll beat you 5-0. And everybody knew that it was at least 5 years away, probably 10 years away in most data science community. But something magic happened. And if you haven't seen the documentary, here's a QR code to it on YouTube. It's free. It'll blow your mind. Move 37 of game number 2 blew the greatest Go player alive's mind. It was a move no human being would ever make. And it was a move no data scientist thought a machine would ever make. And the plane, as they say, landed early. And it's always going to land early. Everything seems to happen ahead of schedule. Agentic is happening ahead of schedule. If I talk to you next year, I'm going to tell you quantum computing and its impact on software is going to happen ahead of schedule. What does this mean? It means that everybody in this room should have an intense curiosity to reach that peak of understanding about the basics of artificial intelligence, its economic impact, how we can explain it to people that we work with, and how we can achieve what I call learning effects. You might have heard of network effects, but when it comes to technologies like AI that create that fear factor, as we learn the first thing and they try to catch up with us, we're already on to playing Go. So with that, I invite you to connect. I thank you very much. Hope you had a great conference.